You've heard the whispers, haven't you? That old house on the edge of town, where the fog clings like a second skin, and the silence feels like it's watching you.
It's not just the architecture, it's the air. The way the wind howls through the cracks in the walls, like it's trying to tell you something you're not meant to understand. The townsfolk call it the cursed chambers, a place where time seems to stand still, and the past won't let go. You've heard the warnings, but you're here now, aren't you? So, what's it going to be? Are you going to turn back, or will you step through that door and see what lies beyond the threshold? The air feels heavier here, as if the house itself is holding its breath. You can almost hear it waiting for you to make the first move. You're not alone in this. The house has its own stories to tell, and it's only just beginning. You ever heard of a town so small, it's practically a footnote in history? Well, Dunwich wasn't just a town, it was a place where the lines between the natural and the supernatural blurred. You know, like when you're sitting by the fire and the shadows on the wall start to move. In the early 1900s, Dunwich was a quiet, rural town, but it had a reputation. People said the air was thick with something ancient, like the ground itself was holding its breath. You ever felt like the world was watching you? That's what it was like there. The town was home to a man named Henry Armitage. He wasn't a bad man, really. He just had a curious mind. And one day, he found something that shouldn't have been found. You ever wonder what it's like to stumble upon a secret that's meant to stay buried? Henry Armitage was obsessed with the occult. He believed the key to understanding the world lay in the hidden, the forbidden, the things people are too afraid to name. And that's when he started to dig, not just in the dirt, but in the bones of the earth itself. You ever wondered what happens when you chase a mystery too far? Well, Henry Armitage didn't just find something, he awakened it. And once something like that is free, there's no going back. That's the thing about the old world, it doesn't play by our rules. And so, Dunwich became the place where the line between man and monster blurred. The town was cursed, not by magic, but by the choice to look too closely at what was meant to stay hidden. That's the story, my dear, of the cursed chambers of Dunwich. You know how sometimes, the first thing you notice is just a feeling, like the air has gone still and the world is holding its breath. That's what happened here, on the night they found the first body. The silence was too thick, like someone had poured it into the room. The first body was a man, found in the library with no signs of struggle. His face was calm, almost peaceful, but his eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead as if seeing something none of us could. It was like he'd been caught in the middle of a dream that was never meant to end. The town doctor checked the body and said the man had died of a sudden heart attack. But his wife insisted he had been fine all day. She said he'd been reading, and then he just stopped. No warning, no pain, just silence. The next day, the man's wife asked to stay in the house. The townspeople said no, but she wouldn't leave. They said she was crazy, but she was just waiting for something that hadn't happened yet. And that's when the whispers started again, only louder, and this time, they weren't just in the walls. They were in the air, in the silence, in the eyes of the people who had once called this place home. You know, sometimes the worst things happen in the quietest places, like this old house on the edge of town, where the wind whispers through the eaves and the moonlight cuts through the trees like a knife. It was supposed to be empty, but something was never quite right. One night, a young couple moved in. They were eager, bright-eyed, and full of plans. But the house had other plans. The first night, the wife claimed to hear a child's laughter coming from the upstairs hallway. No one was home. The husband laughed it off, but the laughter didn't stop. The next morning, the husband found his wife missing. Her things were still in her room, but her bed was empty. The door was locked from the inside. He called the police, but they said there was nothing to do. The house was empty and the wife was just gone. They searched the house for days, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of struggle, just silence. And then, the husband disappeared too. The police said he had gone mad, but the townspeople knew the truth. Something was in that house, and it had taken them both. To this day, the house remains empty. No one dares to live there. And every now and then, the wind whispers through the eaves again, carrying the sound of laughter just like the night they vanished. I remember the way the air felt in that room, thick and heavy, like it was holding its breath. A woman told me she saw a man standing by the window, not moving, just watching. You ever notice how silence can be the loudest sound in a haunted house? She said he looked like a ghost, all in white, but when she tried to step closer, the light went out and he vanished. I asked her if she ran, and she said, "I didn't run, I just stood there, waiting for him to say something." She didn't speak of it for years, said she couldn't sleep without hearing that voice. And you know what? I've heard that same whisper from other people who have been there. It's not just a story, it's a warning. One man claimed he saw the figure walk through the wall, right into the hallway. He said it was just like walking through a curtain, but the hallway was empty. And the curtain? It was never there. Some say the Dunwich horror isn't just a thing, it's a presence. A living memory that lingers, waiting for someone to listen. And if you listen too closely, it might answer back. We began our investigation with the old records, you see, and the first thing we found was a name that had been scratched out and then written over again like someone had tried to erase a truth they couldn't bear to face. The town historian, a wiry woman with a silver braid and a voice like a whisper of wind through autumn leaves, said the name had been struck from the records for reasons she wouldn't explain, only that she heard the name once before, in a place she'd never want to return. As we dug deeper, we found a series of strange symbols carved into the walls of the old asylum, symbols that didn't match any known language, but which seemed to pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible light in the dark. The most unsettling thing we found was a series of photographs taken in the 1930s showing people standing in the asylum's courtyard, but with their faces blurred, as if the camera had been turned away at the last moment. And then, in the final file, we found a single word, written in red ink, Dunwich, and beneath it, a date. The day the asylum was officially sealed and forgotten. So, you see, we're not just telling a story anymore. We're following a trail that leads to something that was never meant to be found. You see, the thing is, no one knows what happened to the last keeper of Dunwich. They vanished without a trace, and no one has seen or heard from them since. Did they leave? Or were they taken? The journal he kept? It was last seen open, the page filled with frantic, looping script. It's like he was trying to write himself out of existence, or into something else entirely. The last time anyone tried to enter, they found a stairway that led nowhere and a mirror that showed only their backs. They ran, and the door slammed shut behind them. And so the library stands, a silent sentinel of secrets, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to uncover the truth. But no one has ever returned. You've heard the tales, but let's not pretend the townsfolk don't still gather in the dim glow of the diner, swapping stories over coffee and pie, whispering about the old Dunwich horror. It's not just a ghost, it's a warning. Some say it's a curse tied to the old rituals, others swear it's the house itself, watching, waiting. But the real question is, did the Dunwich horror ever really leave? Or did it just wait for the right moment to return? Theories swirl like the mist that clings to the town's edges. Some think it's a spirit. Others believe it's a manifestation of fear itself. But in a place like Dunwich, fear is a language the locals speak fluently. And then there are the ones who say the horror never left, all just moved, like a shadow in the corner of your eye, waiting for you to turn your head. You know, some mysteries don't end with a grave or a closed file. They just linger, like a whisper in the dark. And the Dunwich horror? It's one of those. The town itself has moved on, but the land still remembers. You can feel it in the silence, in the way the wind seems to pause before it passes through the old woods. They say the last person to see the man from Dunwich was a farmer who claimed he heard a voice calling him from the woods. But no one believed him. Not then. Not now. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dub smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And so the story remains, a riddle wrapped in silence. We can only wonder, did he run, or was he taken? And if he was taken, where did he go and what did he leave behind? You know, sometimes the scariest things aren't the monsters we see, but the ones we feel in our bones. The Dunwich horror didn't just haunt the town, it left a mark on the hearts of those who lived through it. So, before we move on to the next tale, I'll leave you with this. The past is never truly gone, it just waits for the right moment to remind us. Stay warm, stay curious, and keep your eyes open for the stories that linger long after the fire has died down. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? Those faint murmurs that drift through the trees like a forgotten lullaby. The Luton Who estate is no ordinary house, it's a place where time seems to stand still, and the past won't let go. Built in the 16th century, this estate has been home to many, but something about its foundation feels off. It's as if the earth itself remembers the secrets buried beneath it. Some say the house is haunted by the spirit of a young woman who died in the 1800s, her voice still echoing in the halls. Others whisper of hidden rooms and secret passages that never were. It's not just the ghosts that make Luton Who eerie, it's the silence. The kind of silence that hangs in the air, heavy and thick, like it's holding its breath. And then there are the whispers. You can hear them at night, just before you fall asleep, soft, familiar, and just out of reach. You've heard the whispers, but have you ever wondered where they started? The Luton Who estate, you see, was once a place of grandeur and power, built by a man whose name still lingers in the shadows. In the 17th century, Sir Henry Luton was a man of ambition and avarice who built this estate as a monument to his wealth and influence. But his ambitions came at a cost, and the land itself seemed to remember. The estate became a place of intrigue, where secrets were buried in the earth and the air itself seemed to hum with the weight of the past. It wasn't just a home, it was a prison for the souls of those who dared to live there. And then there was the woman, Lady Eleanor, the last true mistress of Luton Who. Her story is one of love, betrayal, and a final tragic act that left the house forever changed. Her voice, it seems, still lingers in the walls. Now, as you walk these halls, you might hear her whispering in the dark, a voice that lingers like the scent of old roses in the wind. And you wonder, was it love she spoke of, or a warning? You remember how the air felt on that first night, thick and heavy like a woolen blanket, and the wind seemed to carry a whisper just for you. The trees outside the window didn't seem to rustle, they hummed. The first sign was the sound like a sigh, low and wet just before the lights flickered. You turned, but there was no one there, only the creak of the floorboards beneath your feet. Then the cold, not the kind that comes from the window, but a sudden chill that settled in your bones, like the house itself was breathing on you. You laughed it off, thinking it was just the old house, but the feeling stayed. You began to notice things, doors slightly ajar, shadows where there should be none, and a sense that you were never quite alone. And then, one night, you heard it, the voice. Not a scream, not a shout, but a whisper that didn't belong to you. A voice calling your name, just like the one from the old letters. You remember the story of the Luton Who estate, don't you? The place where the walls don't just whisper, they hum with secrets. And then, one night, a woman vanished without a sound. It was the summer of 1949, and the house was quiet, too quiet. The family had gone away for the weekend, leaving behind a house that had been empty for decades, just waiting for something to happen. The next morning, the house was still. The family returned to find the door unlocked, the floorboards creaking as if someone had been walking through them. But there was no one there, just a single, blood-stained handprint on the doorframe. The police called it a disappearance, but the locals knew better. They said the house had always been watching, and that night, it had finally found someone to speak for it. To this day, the walls still whisper, but the story they tell is one of silence, not sound. A woman who vanished, a house that remembered, and a truth that no one has ever been able to find. I've heard from several locals that the Luton Who estate still hums with the echoes of the past. One woman told me she heard a voice calling her name, only to find herself alone in the empty halls. Another said she saw a figure in the window, just a silhouette, but it moved like a living thing, never quite clear, always just out of reach. One of the most chilling accounts came from a retired teacher who said the house was full of whispers, as if the walls were speaking to her in a language she almost understood. She said the whispers were always in the same tone, a woman's voice, low and steady, like someone was trying to warn her, but she couldn't tell what about. And then there's the man who said he heard a child laughing in the night, but when he checked, there was no child, no one, just an old, creaking floorboard that had been there for centuries. We started the investigation with a simple question. What did the walls really know? The Luton Who estate had been sealed for decades, but the air still carried the weight of secrets. The first thing we found was a hidden cellar, sealed beneath the library, with walls that had been carved with names, some familiar, some not. It felt like the house was trying to tell us something, but in a language we couldn't quite read. Then there were the sounds, murmurs that followed us through the halls, like a chorus of unseen voices. It wasn't just the wind, it was the house itself, whispering in a language older than the bricks. We found a diary in the East Wing, written in a shaky hand, describing a woman who vanished in 1947. The entries stopped abruptly, as if the writer had been silenced by something she had seen or heard. And then there were the cold spots, places where the temperature dropped so low, it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. We left the estate with more questions than answers. But sometimes, the walls don't want to let go. They remember, and they wait. You know, the real mystery isn't the ghosts, it's the one thing that's never been explained. The one detail that's just missing. Every report, every testimonial, every whisper about the house points to that same question. No one can say what happened to them, or why they were there. It's like the house is holding its breath, waiting for someone to ask the right question. But no one has ever been brave enough to ask. And that's why we're still here, you see. Still listening. Still waiting. Because sometimes, the silence is louder than the whispers. Some say the whispers come from the past. Others swear they're just the wind through the trees. But here in Luton Who, the wind doesn't whisper, it sings. There's a tale about a woman who disappeared in the 1920s. Her last letter found in a drawer with just one line, "I hear them now, and they're not welcome." Others say the whispers are from the children who once played in the gardens, their laughter now a mournful echo through the halls. And then there are the locals who claim the estate itself is alive, its walls breathing, its secrets waiting for someone brave enough to listen. So, if you're ever in the area, I'd suggest bringing a lantern and a strong stomach. The walls may be whispering, but they also have a lot to say. There are some secrets that just refuse to stay buried, no matter how deep the soil. And the Luton Who estate has a way of making you feel like you're not the only one still searching for answers. The police files are still sealed, and the local historians have all but given up. But there's a quiet persistence in the air, like the house itself is waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. The mystery isn't just about what happened. It's about what's still out there in the dark, holding on to the last thread of truth. And maybe, just maybe, it's still listening. So here's the thing, if you're ever in the area, and you hear a whisper in the wind, or feel the weight of a gaze in the dark, you might want to listen a little closer, just in case. You can almost hear the echoes of laughter now, like the walls are remembering a time when they were alive with voices, not just silence. And yet, the house still waits like it's holding its breath, ready to whisper again, if you dare to listen. The stories are never really over, are they? They just wait for the next listener, the next soul brave enough to lean in and hear. So, if you're ever passing through the countryside and you hear a whisper in the wind, maybe it's not the wind at all. And remember, some stories are best told in the dark, with a fire crackling and a heart full of curiosity. You've heard of the Priory of Sion, haven't you? A secret brotherhood, whispers of lost knowledge, and a name that's been buried for centuries. But what if that name was once attached to something far more sinister? Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Deep in the hills of France, hidden from the world, this place was once a refuge for those who sought to protect ancient truths. But the truth is, some secrets don't stay buried. They return like the wind through the trees. The stories say that the priory was more than a sanctuary, it was a prison. For those who dared to challenge the church, or for those who knew too much. And some say, even after the last stone was laid, the echoes of its victims remained. Now, the priory is a ruin, but the air still hums with something ancient. You can feel it when you walk through the gate, a presence like a ghost in the walls, waiting to be remembered. And so, we begin our journey into the heart of the priory, not just a place but a story. One that's been forgotten, but never truly gone. You know, the Priory of Sion didn't start as a place of horror, but as a refuge for thinkers and mystics. It was founded in the 12th century by a group of scholars and knights who wanted to protect knowledge from the clutches of the church. These early members were called the Brotherhood of the Rose, and they believed in hidden truths buried in history, passed down through generations in secret. Their goal was to safeguard the wisdom of the ancients. But as time passed, the priory became more than just a sanctuary for knowledge. It became a place where secrets were guarded fiercely, and where the line between truth and myth began to blur. Some say the priory was a haven for those who dared to question the world, but others believe it became a place where the past was buried deeper than ever, so deep that even the earth forgot its name. You know, sometimes the first whispers of something wrong are just a few missing things: a clock that never ticks, a door that won't close, or a shadow that lingers just a moment too long. The nuns began to notice things clothes that had been folded neatly one morning were found crumpled the next, and voices that only they could hear echoing through the halls at night. One nun claimed to see a child playing in the garden, but when she turned, there was only the wind stirring the dry grass and the scent of something sweet and terrible lingering in the air. It was like the place had begun to remember, and the memory it had of its victims was not kind. You know, the real horror of the priory isn't the ghosts or the legends, it's the silence. The silence of those who vanished without a trace, their names erased from history like they never existed. Imagine being just 15 years old, sent to the priory for a lesson in philosophy. One day you're there, the next you're gone. No note, no warning, just gone. They say the priory had a secret chamber, hidden beneath the floorboards where the missing were taken. Some believe it was a place of learning, others say it was a prison, and some say it was worse. The last recorded mention of a missing child is in 1832. No body was ever found, no explanation, just a name, a date, and a question that no one ever answered. To this day, some say the echo of their voices can still be heard in the halls, whispering for help, for justice, for someone to remember. I've spoken to a few people who claim to have seen the priory at night, when the mist clings to the stones like a shroud. One woman said the walls seemed to breathe, and the air was thick with the scent of old blood and something sweet, like burnt sugar. Another said she heard children laughing in the corridors, but when she turned, there was only silence and the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in the stone. She left, but she couldn't stop looking back. One man told me he was walking the grounds at midnight and saw a figure in the distance. It was a woman in a dark dress holding a lantern. She didn't run. She just stood there, looking at him, and then vanished into the fog. They say the priory is a place where the past refuses to stay buried, and if you listen closely, you might hear the echoes of those who were forgotten and the ones who still wait to be found. The investigation began with whispers of a sealed ledger buried in the archives of the Vatican. We followed the trail of forgotten names, each one a shadow of a life erased. The ledger didn't name the victims, it only listed their final days, dates, locations, and a strange symbol that no one could decipher. It felt like a puzzle made of silence. The frescoes showed people who looked like the victims dressed in their own clothes, but with their faces erased. It was as if the walls remembered them, but the world had forgotten. One name kept appearing: Marie de Montfort, a woman who lived in the 14th century, accused of witchcraft, but her story was never told. We wondered if she was a victim or the last keeper of a truth that had been buried. As we dug deeper, we found a pattern: names, places, symbols, all linked to a secret that had been passed down in silence. It was like the past was trying to speak to us through a veil of dust and fear. You know, the thing that really haunts me about this place isn't the screams or the cold. It's the one detail that's never been explained. Why did they leave the door open? It's like the house is waiting for someone to come back. Every time we've been here, that door stays unlocked, like it's been waiting for us. It's not just a mystery, it's a message. But what are they trying to tell us? Are they still here? Or did they never leave? You think about it, don't you? What if the door wasn't just left open? What if it was meant to be open? What if the house is trying to tell us something about the people who lived here, about the ones who never left? And here's the thing, no one ever goes near that door. Not even the caretaker. They say it's too dangerous. But what if it's not dangerous? What if it's the only way out? And someone's still waiting inside? You've heard the rumors about the Priory of Sion, but let me tell you what the locals still whisper. They say the stones remember, and the wind carries the names of those who were never found. Some say the Priory wasn't just a place of secrets, it was a trap. A hidden chamber where the innocent were taken and the guilty were buried. But who was guilty? And who was innocent? And then there are the stories about the children. Some say they were never children at all, but the ones who vanished still haunt the dreams of those who remember. Theories multiply like the roots of the old trees. Some say the Priory was a sanctuary, others a prison. But what if it was both? And what if the truth is buried deeper than any grave? You know, sometimes the most terrifying silence isn't the absence of sound, but the absence of answers. We followed every lead, every whisper, every shadow, and still, the truth has slipped through our fingers like smoke. There are those who say the Priory's secrets are buried deeper than the earth, protected by something older than the stone itself. Some believe the voices we hear aren't just echoes, but warnings. And then there are the people who still live near the Priory, those who have never left. They say the wind carries the voices of the lost, and that the stones remember what the records forgot. So here we are, still searching, still wondering, still waiting for the silence to break. Maybe the answers are out there, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. As the last candle flickers, I wonder if the Priory's secrets still whisper through the stones, waiting for the right soul to listen. Sometimes, the quietest places hold the loudest echoes, like a lullaby that never ends. There's a beauty in the mystery, isn't there? A kind of poetry in the unanswered questions. But remember, dear listener, what we don't know may not be as scary as what we imagine. So, shall we step into the next tale, where the shadows are deeper and the silence is louder? You've heard of the legends, but have you ever stood at the edge of Glastonbury Tor and felt the weight of the earth itself holding its breath? It's not just a hill, it's a place where time seems to fold in on itself, and the air hums with something older than memory. For centuries, the Tor has been a place of pilgrimage, a sacred ground where the ancient and the divine meet. But beneath the stones, beneath the layers of history, there's a whisper of something watching, something waiting. The locals say the Tor is guarded by unseen forces, keepers of the old ways, protectors of secrets that should never be spoken. You can't just walk up there. You have to be invited, or you'll find yourself lost in the mist, never quite sure if you're being followed. And if you listen closely, if you let the silence settle in your bones, you might hear it a sound like a breath, like a sigh, like the wind carrying a voice that never quite reaches you. That's the Tor's way of saying you're not alone. So, what's the story behind the unseen guardians? What ancient pact or forgotten truth lingers in the stones? That's what we're about to uncover step by step, stone by stone, into the heart of Glastonbury Tor. You've heard of Glastonbury, but Glastonbury Tor? That's where the real magic starts. It's a hill, but it's more than that, it's a place where the earth remembers. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The Tor was built in the 3rd century, when the Romans first came to Britain. They built a temple there, dedicated to the goddess Isis, and it was a place of power and mystery. But the Tor isn't just a relic of the past. It's tied to the legends of King Arthur and the mystical Avalon. Some say the hill is a gateway, a place where the veil between worlds is thin. And then there are the monks. In the 6th century, a Benedictine monastery was built at the base of the Tor. They called it a sacred place, a place where the spirits of the past still walk. The Tor has always been a place of power, but also of protection. Some say it's watched over by unseen guardians, spirits who guard the land and the people who live near it. You know how sometimes the air feels different? Like the world holds its breath. That's what happened on Glastonbury Tor that morning, quiet, too quiet, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The first thing they noticed was the smell like wet earth and something older, something that didn't belong. It was faint, but it clung to the back of the throat like a warning. They tried to laugh it off, to dismiss it as the imagination of a tired traveler, but the feeling didn't leave. It followed them like a shadow, lingering just at the edge of sight. And then, just as they started to move away, the air shifted again. Not a breeze, but a pressure, like something had just stepped into the space between the world we know and the one that doesn't. You remember the legend? don't you? The one about the woman who vanished on the tour, leaving only her wedding ring behind. It was 1953, and the night was thick with mist, like the world had been wrapped in silk. She was a young mother, just back from the war, and she came to the tour to pray for her lost child. The wind howled like a mourning spirit, and the air smelled of damp earth and something older, something wrong. The next morning, the villagers found her ring in the grass, and her footprints leading straight up the path, but not a trace of her. Some say she was taken by the tour itself, others that she walked too far into the veil between worlds. To this day, the tour is said to whisper her name in the wind, and those who stay too long might hear her calling soft, sweet, and full of sorrow. I had a visitor once who swore the tour was whispering to her. She said the wind carried words, not from the hills, but from the stones themselves. It was a language she couldn't understand, but she knew it was watching. Another man claimed to hear footsteps on the path, not his own. He said they were slow and deliberate, like someone walking behind him. He turned around and the path was empty, but the silence afterward was louder than the wind. Some say the tour is a place where the veil is thin and the dead can walk. But others say it's not the dead who are there, it's the ones who were never meant to be. They linger, waiting for someone to remember them. The tour doesn't just haunt the living, it reminds them of what they've forgotten. It doesn't whisper, it hums. And if you listen closely, you might hear the echo of a voice you once knew, but who has long since vanished. We follow the trail of whispers to a crumbling old cottage on the edge of the tour. The walls were thick with time, and the air smelled of damp earth and something older than memory. Inside, the floorboards groaned like old friends, and the walls seemed to breathe. I found a journal tucked beneath the loose floorboard, pages yellowed, ink faded, but the words still held a haunted pulse. We followed the path, and the further we walked, the more the air seemed to thicken. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to arrive. At the center of the circle, we found a stone altar untouched by time. Carved into its surface were symbols that seemed to shift in the dim light, as if they were alive and waiting for us to understand. The air was thick with the weight of something unseen, and for a moment I felt as though the stones were watching us, waiting for the right moments to reveal their story. You've heard the stories, you've seen the legends, but there's one detail that has never been explained. The same detail, repeated in every account, every journal, every whispered tale. It's not the shape of the shadow, or the way it moves, or even the color, it's the fact that it never, ever fades. Not in the daylight, not in the moonlight, not even in the presence of the sun. Some say it's a message, a warning, or a message from the past. Others say it's a guardian, a spirit that watches over the tour, unseen but never absent. But no one has ever been able to say for sure what it is. And that's why, even after all these years, the tour still holds its secrets, waiting for someone to listen. You've heard the names, but let me tell you the stories. Some say the tour is watched by spirits of the ancient druids. Others whisper of a woman who died in a storm and now guard the cliffs from the sea. There's even a theory that the tour is the home of a ghostly shepherd who leads lost souls to safety but vanishes before they reach the shore. Some say these symbols are warnings left by the druids to keep the spirits of the tour from wandering too far. And then there are the children's stories, passed down in hushed tones. The ones about the tour's unseen guardians who watch over those who dare to dream of the past. So, what do you think? Are these just stories, or do the hills of Glastonbury still hold their secrets, waiting to be found? You know, the thing about Glastonbury Tor is that it's not just the land that holds the ghosts, it's the people who still live here. And some of them say the old ones aren't done with us yet. There was that farmer who vanished in 1972, and the police never found a trace of him. His wife still lives in the cottage near the Tor, and she swears the wind carries his voice at night. And then there's the missing child from 1985, the one who was last seen running up the Tor. They never found her boots, or her toys, or her voice. So you see, even now, the tour doesn't just haunt the past, it whispers to the present. And sometimes, it waits for someone to listen. You know, sometimes the most powerful ghosts aren't the ones you see, but the ones you feel in your bones. The silence, the weight of the air, the way the wind seems to pause before it moves. And sometimes, the truest stories aren't about the past, but the present. The way the earth holds its breath, waiting for something or someone to return. So, as we turn the page, I'll leave you with this. Sometimes, the greatest guardians are the ones who never leave. And sometimes, they're the ones who never let you go. Now, let's light the fire and see what story waits beyond the next hill. You've heard of haunted houses, but Bell's Cottage? That's a place that whispers secrets in the dark. A crumbling Victorian estate with more ghosts than guests, and a history so heavy, you can almost feel it in your bones. Built in the 1880s by a wealthy industrialist, Bell's Cottage was meant to be a sanctuary, but it became a prison for its owner's wife, a woman he locked away for daring to question his fortune. You can still hear the echo of her screams if you listen closely. Now, decades later, Bell's Cottage is abandoned, but it's never truly been empty. Locals say the bells still ring at midnight, and the sound is never quite right, too loud, too soft, too close. It's like the house is calling someone home. And if you're ever lucky enough to hear the bells, don't be surprised if you feel a chill. Because sometimes, the house doesn't just remember the past, it wants to keep it. You know, the first time someone heard those bells ring at Bell's cottage, they thought it was just the wind. But then they heard it again, and again, and again, always at midnight, always with a sound like a child's laughter. The family that lived there, the Whitneys, were known for their quiet, reclusive ways. They never invited friends, and the children were always kept indoors. But you know what they say, curiosity killed the cat, and secrets kill the soul. The Whitneys never spoke of what happened, but the rumors spread like wildfire. Some said Clara was taken by the woods, others that she was never there at all. And then, one by one, the rest of the family vanished, too. Now, the bells still ring at midnight. Some say they're the voice of Clara calling for help. Others say they're the voices of the whole family, trapped between the world they left and the one they never returned to. And so, Bell's cottage stands alone, its bells a whisper of the past. But the question remains, did Clara ever come back? Or is she still out there, waiting for someone to listen? The first signs that something was terribly wrong began with the sound of a bell. It wasn't the kind of bell you'd find in a church. No, it was smaller, tinny, and it rang like it had been beaten with a hammer. The locals called it the Bell's Cottage for a reason. They said it was built by a woman who was obsessed with the idea of summoning something from the beyond. She'd spent years gathering old bells, each one a piece of her twisted curiosity. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. One night, a neighbor said she heard the bell ringing in the middle of the woods, but when she went to investigate, there was no one there. The bell had vanished, and the cottage had gone quiet. By the time the town started asking questions, the bell had already been heard in 3 different places. It was always the same time, always the same sound, and always it was followed by a whisper. No one could say for sure what the bell meant. Some said it was a warning, others said it was a message, but the one thing everyone agreed on was that it was never supposed to ring again. You remember the sound of the bells, don't you? That haunting, high-pitched chime that echoed through the woods like a ghost trying to reach you. One evening in 1948, the bells stopped. No one could explain why. The town said it was a sign, a message from the past, but no one dared to ask what it meant. The town held a search, but nothing was found. Some said she ran, others claimed she was taken, but the bells never rang again, and the silence was louder than any explanation. To this day, the bells are silent, but sometimes, on the coldest nights, you can hear them again just for a moment before the silence swallows them whole. I've spoken to several elderly locals who swear they've heard the bells ring at midnight, even when no one's around. One woman said she woke up to the sound, then saw a shadowy figure standing by the window, looking right at her. Another neighbor claimed she saw a woman in a long black dress standing at the edge of the garden, holding a small child's hand. She didn't move, just stared until the bells rang again and the figure vanished. One man told me he used to visit the cottage as a child, and every time the bells rang, he felt a cold breath on his neck. He said it was as if the house was trying to tell him something he never understood. And then there's the one who said she saw the bells ring. Not once, but twice. Once for the child, and once for the mother. A haunting reminder that some stories never end, and some houses never let go. We began with the archives, poring over brittle letters and yellowed maps. The first clue was a faded postcard from 1947, postmarked Bell's Cottage, with a sketch of a girl and a bell. You ever seen anything like that? It felt like someone had tried to leave a message for us. The local librarian, Mrs. Whitaker, had heard the stories all her life. She told us about the bell that never rang, and how the owner, a reclusive woman named Alina, would often disappear for days, only to return with a faint metallic scent on her fingers. The real shock came when we found the bell itself, hidden beneath the floorboards of the cottage. It was tarnished, cold to the touch, and when we lifted it, the air grew still and the walls seemed to whisper. We didn't just find a bell, we found the diary. It was tucked in the back of a drawer, sealed with wax. The entries were frantic, full of fear and a name: he's back. He never left. You ever felt like you were being watched by someone who wasn't there? The final piece of the puzzle was a faded photo of a young man in uniform, standing beside Elena. His face was blurred, but the date was clear. 1944. A soldier, and a ghost that had never left the house. You know, the thing that's bugged me most about Bell's Cottage isn't the ghosts or the whispers, it's that one detail. The one thing that just doesn't fit. No one ever explains it, and it's always been there, like a shadow in the corner of your eye. It's the blood-stained bell rope. You see it every time, but no one ever talks about it. Some say it's just old rust, others say it's a trick of the light. But I've seen it, and it's not just red, it's almost like it's still warm. No one seems to care about it. Not even the locals. They'll talk about the ghosts, the noises, the cold spots, but that rope, it's like it's been forgotten, or maybe it's been ignored on purpose. So what do you think? Is it just an old rope, or is it something else? Maybe the real mystery isn't who died in that house, but what died in that rope, and why it still looks like it's bleeding. Some say the bells at Belle's cottage weren't just rung for the holidays. They were rung for the dead. You ever wonder what it sounds like when a house mourns? Old Mrs. Higdon swore she heard the bells ring on the night her husband died. Not the usual church bells, but a low, mournful chime that echoed through the woods. There's a theory that the bells were once part of a funeral bell for a child who died in the house. Some say the sound is the house trying to say goodbye. But don't be fooled by the old stories. Some folks say the bells are just a trick of the wind, or a trick of the mind. But I tell you, if you ever hear them ring on a clear night, don't be surprised. And if you do hear them, remember, the house is always listening, and it's always waiting. To this day, no one knows what happened that night. The bells still ring, but they don't sound the same. Some say they're whispering secrets only the lost can hear. The police closed the case, but the town never forgot. Every year on the anniversary, the bells chime just once and then fall silent. The cottage itself is sealed off now, but the bells still ring in the dead of night. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the trees. No one has ever found the girl, and no one has ever found the truth. But the bells still ring, and they never stop calling. You've heard the bells, felt the chill, and wondered if the house still watches. But sometimes, the most unsettling silence is the one that follows a ghost's last whisper. In the quiet of a forgotten room, where dust dances in the faintest breeze, you might just catch a glimpse of something that shouldn't be there, something that remembers. And when the bells finally fall silent, it's not the end of the tale, it's just the pause before the next one begins. So, dear listener, I'll leave you with this. Never walk away from a story that feels like it's walking away from you. And if you hear the bells again, remember they're not calling you home. They're calling you back. You've heard of the African savannah? But have you ever imagined a place where time itself seems to freeze? That's Olduvai Gorge, a place where the wind whispers through ancient stone and the earth holds secrets that even the stars can't forget. This isn't just any valley. It's a cradle of human evolution, where the first tools were made and the first steps toward civilization took root. But there's something about the ground here that feels watchful. Some say it's the spirits of those who once walked this land, their lives and deaths etched into the very rock. Others say it's the land itself, alive and ancient, watching over the bones of its past. And then there are the disappearances, people who vanish without a trace, only to be found days later, their belongings still lying where they left them, as if they never meant to stay. So, what do you think? Is it the land, or something older, something deeper, that calls to those who wander too close? Or is it just the way the light plays on the rocks, making you believe you're not alone? You know, the Olduvai Gorge didn't start as a haunted place. It began as a place of discovery, a cradle of human evolution. But what if I told you the first people to walk there were not just scientists, but something else entirely? In the 1930s, a British paleontologist named Louis Leakey led an expedition to the gorge. He was obsessed with finding the origins of man, and he wasn't alone. His wife, Mary, was there too, with her own dreams of discovery and a deep, unspoken sorrow. They found the bones of our ancestors, but also something more, a sense of something watching them, lingering in the air. Mary Leakey later wrote of feeling a presence, as if the land itself was remembering. The gorge became a place of both science and silence. Some say the spirits of those who walked there before us still live in the rock, waiting for someone to listen. But the true story of Olduvai is not just about bones and discoveries. It's about the people who walked there, the ones who felt something more than dust and time, and the ones who never left. You know how sometimes the air just feels different, like it's holding its breath? That's what it was like that morning. The sun was barely up, but the silence was thick enough to cut with a knife. The wind had died, and not a single bird called out. It was as if the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for someone to stir. It wasn't the sound that made me turn, it was the way the dust on the ground seemed to stir, as if something was moving beneath it, unseen and waiting. I told myself it was just the wind, the heat of the day rising, but then I saw it a shadow, not quite a shape, but something that didn't belong. It moved like smoke, yet it was solid. And then the silence broke. Not with a scream, not with a cry, it was a sound that made the bones in my body go cold. Something was coming, and it wasn't coming alone. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You know, the real horror didn't start with a ghost or a shadow. It began with a man who vanished, leaving behind only his notebook and a trail of unanswered questions. He was a geologist, a man of science, but the Olduvai Gorge had a way of swallowing even the most rational minds. They found his campsite, but not his body. They searched for weeks, but the gorge swallowed everything. No tracks, no signs of struggle, just the feeling that someone had taken him before he could finish his work. The locals say the land is alive, that it's not just the earth that remembers, but the stories of those who came before. Some say the gorge doesn't forget, it waits. And to this day, No one knows what happened to him, but if you listen closely, you can still hear the echo of his voice in the wind, calling out from the depths of the earth. I remember the first time I heard about Old Uvi Gorge. A friend said, "You won't believe what happened there." Well, I did, and I still don't. A local farmer told me he saw a figure standing at the edge of the gorge, just before dawn. It wasn't a man, not really. It was something older, something waiting. Some say the wind carries voices through the gorge at night, whispering names, calling out from the past. Not words, but something deeper, something that lingers. One man claimed he heard laughter, but it wasn't laughter at all. It was a sound that made his skin crawl, like the earth itself was laughing at him. They say the ghosts of Old Uvi are not cruel. They are just lost, waiting for someone to listen, to remember, to believe. We followed the trail of whispers through the dry, cracked earth, where the wind seemed to carry the echo of a child's laughter. It was as if the land itself remembered what had been lost. The team found a cave marked by ancient symbols, untouched by time. It was a place of silence, but not of peace. It felt like it was watching us. One of the bones had a small, carved symbol like a hand pressed into stone. It was the same symbol we'd seen carved into the rock outside the village. We started to see patterns, symbols, sounds, even the way the wind shifted. It was as if the land was trying to tell us a story, one that had been buried for millennia. The deeper we went, the more the air seemed to hum, like a distant voice just out of reach. It was as if the earth itself was breathing. And then we heard it, a voice, not from the present, but from the past, whispering in a language that felt both ancient and familiar. You know, the thing that's always bugged me about this place is the one detail no one ever explains. It's not the whispers or the cold, it's what happened to the last person who tried to leave. They say the gate locked itself from the inside, and the key was never found. But no one seems to care to ask how it was even opened in the first place. You see, the stories don't end with the disappearance. They end with the silence. And sometimes, silence is the loudest sound of all. So here's my question to you, dear listener. Have you ever wondered what happens when a place stops wanting to be found? Because sometimes, the most haunted places aren't the ones you find. They're the ones that find you. You've heard the tales of the Old Uvi Gorge. But here's the thing, some say the real ghosts aren't the ones you find in the caves. They're the ones who stayed behind, the ones who never left the land they loved. Some locals claim the spirits of the early hominids still walk the valley, not as monsters, but as guardians, watching over the land they helped shape. You can almost hear them in the wind. There are whispers of a hidden chamber, a place where the bones of the first humans are said to rest, untouched by time. Some say it's a sacred site, others a trap for the unwary. The stories aren't all about fear. Some say the spirits here are kind, guiding lost travelers or offering wisdom to those who listen, but only if you're willing to hear them. So, if you ever find yourself wandering the Old Uvi Gorge, remember some legends are just stories, others are warnings, and some, well, they're waiting for you. You know, sometimes the most unsettling mysteries are the ones that never get solved. The Old Uvi Gorge is like that place where the past clings to the present and no one can quite say why. There are whispers of a hidden chamber beneath the rock formations, a place where something was buried and maybe not just stone and bones. Some say the echoes you hear are not just wind, but the voices of those who were here before us, still trying to find their way home. And then there are the stories of things seen, things heard, things felt but never confirmed, just enough to keep the mystery alive and the fear a little longer. So, what do you think? Is the Old Uvi Gorge haunted, or is it just a place where the past refuses to let go? You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest whispers. The Old Uvi Gorge may be ancient, but its stories are far from over. And though we've told you tales of ghosts and the unknown, the truth is, some mysteries are meant to linger in the dark, waiting for the right heart to listen. But don't worry, dear listener, the next story is just beginning, and it's one you won't want to miss. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've a new tale to tell, one that's just as old as the earth itself, and perhaps just as haunted. You've heard the whispers of the Priory of Sion, a place where time seems to fold in on itself. It's not just a ruin, it's a living memory, a place where the air feels heavier than the stones that surround it. The locals call it the Sleeping Priory, not because it's quiet, but because the silence feels like it's holding something back. You can almost hear the echoes of a forgotten past, just out of reach. There are stories of people who wandered in at night, drawn by an unspoken pull, only to never return. Some say they were never there at all, but others swear they saw shadows moving where no one should be. And then there are the lights glowing faintly in the corners, like the last flicker of a candle. Some say it's just the moonlight, but others say it's something else entirely. Something watching. So, you're here now, standing at the edge of the unknown, with the weight of history pressing down on you. Are you ready to step inside, or will you turn back before the shadows take you? You see, the Priory of Sion didn't start as a place of ghosts, but as a refuge for those who dared to believe in ancient wisdom. It was founded in the 12th century, during a time when the world was still full of secrets and the church held most of the answers. The first monks who gathered there were scholars and mystics, not just men of faith. They They studied the old texts, the hidden symbols, and the lost knowledge of the ancients. They believed the world was older than the church cared to admit. But not everyone welcomed their ideas. The church saw them as dangerous heretics, and the priory became a target. They were forced to move, to hide, to protect their knowledge from those who would destroy it for fear of what it might reveal. So they built their new home deep in the mountains, where the cold and the silence would help them guard their secrets. That's where the priory of Sion truly began, not as a place of evil, but as a sanctuary for those who sought truth in a world that tried to bury it. You remember how the air felt that day, like the world had held its breath. The wind had a strange, whispering rhythm, as if the trees themselves were trying to tell us something we weren't ready to hear. The first real clue came in the form of an old, rusted gate half buried in ivy, its iron bars twisted like the fingers of some long-forgotten guardian. The caretaker had gone missing the day before, and no one had seen him since. The house stood empty, its windows dark and its doors ajar, as if it had been waiting for someone to come back. The air inside smelled of damp wood and something older, something that made your skin prickle, even before you realized you weren't alone. And then, just as you turned to leave, you saw a figure standing at the edge of the light, watching you, not with malice, but with a kind of quiet, ancient patience. You know, sometimes the most chilling stories aren't about what happened, but what was never found. The Priory of Sion had a secret room hidden behind a tapestry where they kept the most sacred of relics until one night it vanished. The last person to see the relic was Brother Alaric, a man of quiet faith and quiet fear. He said he heard a sound like a child's whisper just before the room was sealed behind him. He never returned. No one dared to open the door, not even the bishop. He said it was a place of silence and penance where the soul is tested, but some say it was a prison for a child who never grew up. Years passed, and the priory fell into ruin. But in the quiet of the night, some say you can still hear the whisper like a child asking, "Will someone come?" And the faint sound of footsteps, always just out of reach. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. I remember the first time I heard the whispers in the library. The old books were silent, but the walls were not. It was as if the air itself held a secret waiting to be uncovered. One of the librarians, a woman named Margaret, swore she saw a figure in the corner of the room just before the lights flickered out. She said it looked like a woman in a dark dress, standing there, never moving. Some claimed the priory had a child who once lived there, a girl with a silver locket, who vanished without a trace. No one ever found her, but the locket still sits on the desk, untouched. It's not the ghosts that haunt the priory, it's the silence. The way the air feels heavier when you're alone, and the way you can't shake the feeling that someone, or something, is always listening. We began with the old ledgers, yellowed and brittle, filled with names and dates that seemed to whisper secrets. I couldn't help but wonder, were these just records or something more? One name kept appearing, Margarita Latour. I found her portrait in the margins of a letter, her eyes seeming to follow me. What did she know that the others didn't? We found a hidden room behind a loose stone in the chapel. It was untouched, with a stone table and a single candle that had been burning for centuries. What was it waiting for? One of the researchers reported hearing a voice in the night, calling out her name. It wasn't the first time. I asked her, "Do you think she's still here, or just remembering?" We didn't find proof of the curse, but we found something worse, evidence that the past was still alive, waiting for someone to listen. You know, there's one thing that's always bugged me about the Priory of Sion. It's the one detail that's never been explained. Like, why did they have to hide their books in the first place? You'd think if they were hiding something, they'd be more careful. But no, they just buried it in plain sight. It's like they were trying to say, look, we're not hiding anything. And then there's the fact that no one's ever found the books. Not even the people who supposedly found them. It's like the priory itself is protecting its secrets. Maybe they weren't hiding the books. Maybe they were hiding the truth. And that truth is still waiting in the shadows, just out of reach. You've heard the stories, but what did the locals say? They whisper that the priory isn't just haunted, it's cursed. Some say the stones remember every secret ever buried beneath them. There's a tale about a woman who vanished in 1947, her last words said to be a plea for help. No one ever found her, and now the wind seems to carry her voice through the halls of the priory. The local priest once told me that the priory's silence is its most terrifying sound. It doesn't just echo, it remembers. And sometimes, it speaks back. So, what do you think? Is the priory a place of mystery, or is it a warning? I'll tell you this, when the wind howls through those stones, it's not just the wind. It's the past, reaching out. And so, the Priory of Sion remains a place where the past refuses to fade. You've heard the stories, felt the chill, but the truth, it's still buried in the dust of time, waiting for someone to dig it up. No one has solved the mystery of the missing manuscripts, and no one has found the bodies that were said to be hidden there. It's like the priory has its own secret language, one that only the ghosts understand. As the candlelight flickers, I wonder if the shadows we chase ever find their way back to us. Sometimes, the most unsettling silence is the one that follows a story. And as you leave this tale, remember that the past is never truly gone, it just waits patient and quiet for the right moment to stir. So, as you go, I'll leave you with this. Sometimes, the best stories are the ones that never end. And if you ever feel the pull of the unknown, remember stories are like ghosts. They linger, they whisper, and they wait for you to listen. You ever wonder what happens when a plane just vanishes? In 1974, Trans-America Flight 800 took off from New York with 162 souls on board, and then nothing. No distress call, no wreckage, just a sky that seemed to swallow the plane whole. The next day, the world held its breath. Search teams scoured the ocean, but nothing emerged. The silence was louder than any sound. You can almost hear the whispers of the sea, trying to tell us what happened. Some say the plane was caught in a storm so violent it tore it apart. Others whisper that it was a ghostly flight, pulled into another dimension by forces we can't explain. Whatever the truth, the silence still lingers. And now, decades later, the mystery still haunts the waters. Every so often, strange lights are reported over the area like the plane is trying to find its way home. Or maybe it never left. So, what do you think happened to Flight 800? Did it fall, or was it taken? And if it was taken, where did it go? That's the question we're here to answer by the light of the fire and the silence of the sea. You know, it all started on a quiet Tuesday in July, 1974. The sky was a pale blue, the air was thick with the smell of salt and distant thunder. That's when the Trans-America Flight 800 took off from San Francisco, carrying 101 souls with dreams in their heads and hearts full of hope. The flight was supposed to be a routine one, just a 14-hour trip to Tokyo. But what they didn't know is that the ocean ahead would become their final destination. It was a route that had been flown 1,000 times before, yet something about that day felt off. Now, I'm not saying the sky was actually haunted, but there's something about the way the air felt that day. A kind of weight on the chest, like the world was holding its breath. And then, without warning, the plane vanished, like it had never been there at all. The search that followed was like a slow, haunting symphony. Boats, planes, and satellites scanned the ocean for hours, but there was no trace of the plane, no wreckage, no bodies. Just silence and the sound of waves. And that silence, it said more than any scream ever could. To this day, we don't know exactly what happened. Was it a mechanical failure, a freak storm, or something else entirely? The mystery has only deepened, and the silence of that ocean still echoes in the hearts of those who remember. You remember the first time you heard about Trans-America Flight 800? It was just another Tuesday, and the world kept spinning, but something in the air felt off. Like the sky itself was holding its breath. The flight was supposed to be routine, a simple coast from San Francisco to Los Angeles. But then, the radar blips went dark, and the radio's silence began. It was like the plane had simply vanished into the clouds. People started to ask questions, but the answers were sparse. The FAA said the plane was last seen on radar, and then nothing. It was like the world had forgotten about it, but not the people who had seen it. You could feel it in the air, a quiet unease, like the sky had swallowed the plane whole and was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. You remember the night it all went quiet, don't you? The sky was a deep, bruised blue, and the air was thick with the promise of a storm that never came. Then silence. Just silence, like the world had taken a breath and forgotten to exhale. The plane, a sleek silver beast, had been climbing toward the clouds, its engines humming like a lullaby. But instead of reaching the sky, it vanished. No distress call, no wreckage, just a trail of questions left in its wake. They say the plane was swallowed by the clouds, but no one ever found the wreckage. Not a single piece. Just a mystery wrapped in a storm, and a sky that refused to answer. The silence that followed was louder than any noise. It was the sound of 100 lives lost, and a sky that had taken them without a word. What happened up there? No one knows, but we're still listening. I remember the day like it was yesterday. The sky was gray, the air thick with the smell of rain, and the radio crackled with the first whispers of something strange. One flight attendant, a quiet woman named Margaret, said she saw a flicker of light, like a matchstick, just before the plane vanished. It wasn't a light from the sky, but from the plane itself. There were even rumors, whispered in bars and backrooms, of a man in a suit who had been on board. He vanished too, and no one ever saw him again. And then there was the pilot's log. It was never found, but people say it ended with a single line: "Something was waiting for us." The investigation began in the early hours of the morning, with a team of federal agents and aviation experts poring over flight data and satellite images. They had no bodies, no wreckage, and no clear answers, just to avoid where a plane should have been. They found strange anomalies in the radar data fluctuations that didn't match any known weather patterns. It was as if the plane had vanished into a void, swallowed by something unseen. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Theories ranged from mechanical failure to a supernatural event, but none could explain the sudden silence. It was as if the plane had simply blinked out of existence. Despite years of searching, the truth remained buried in the depths of the ocean. The case became a mystery not just of the plane, but of the silence that followed. You know, the one thing that has never been explained is the fact that the plane never went down in the ocean. It just vanished. No wreckage, no bodies, no trace of where it went. They say it vanished in the middle of the Pacific, but no one can say for sure where. Some say it was swallowed by the waves, others believe it was taken by something else entirely. And still, no one has found a single piece of the plane. No engine parts, no debris, not even a single piece of luggage. It's as if the plane was never there at all. So, what do you think? Was it a miracle, a trick of the weather, or something more mysterious? The truth is out there, waiting to be found. You've heard the official story, but out here, folks still whisper that Flight 800 wasn't just a plane that went down, it was a message. A message that somehow got lost in the clouds, and the sky is still listening. Some say the plane didn't crash, it was pulled down by something unseen, something that's been watching the Pacific for decades. Others say it was a test run, a cover for something bigger. But no one's ever found the truth. There's a rumor that the plane's black box was never found, that the voices inside were swallowed by the sea and the ocean still hums with their last words. But no one's ever dared to listen. And then there are the people who say they saw it. Not the plane, but something else. A light, a ship, a whisper in the wind. They don't talk about it much, but you can always tell when they've been there. So what do you think? Was it a crash, a cover-up, or something that was never meant to be found? I'll tell you this, whichever it is, the sky's still holding its breath. Even now, decades later, the mystery of Flight 800 lingers like a shadow in the corner of your mind. You can't shake the feeling that something is still waiting to be uncovered, just out of reach. New theories pop up like dandelion seeds in the wind, but they all seem to fade before they can take root. You wonder if the truth is buried so deep, it's almost impossible to find. The families still wait, hoping for answers that have never come. They sit in their quiet homes, surrounded by photos and memories, holding on to the hope that one day, the truth will finally be found. And so, the mystery of Flight 800 remains, a story that refuses to be forgotten, a question that lingers like a ghost in the dark, waiting for someone to finally shine a light. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest whispers. Imagine sitting by the fire, sipping on a cup of tea, and suddenly the silence feels too heavy. It's the kind of silence that makes you look up, just to make sure you're not alone. Like the house itself is holding its breath. And then, just like that, the story fades away. Not because it's over, but because it's waiting for you to carry it forward. So, what will you do with the silence now? Will you let it settle, or will you chase the next mystery? Either way, the fire will still be there, and the stories, well, they'll always find their way back to you. You've heard of the Priory of Sion, haven't you? A whisper in the dark, a secret buried beneath centuries of dust and deception. You ever wondered what lies beneath the stones of a place that once held the keys to the universe? This isn't just a building, it's a relic of a time when knowledge was power, and power was protected with blood and silence. You think about the secrets it might still guard, and your heart begins to race. Some say the Priory was a refuge for scholars, a hidden library for those who dared to seek the truth. Others say it was a prison for those who knew too much. You wonder which tale is closer to the truth. The air here feels heavy, like the weight of history pressing down on you. You can almost hear the echo of footsteps, the murmur of voices long gone, and the hush of 1,000 unspoken secrets. You feel it in your bones. The Priory of Sion isn't just a place, it's a mystery waiting to be uncovered. And you, dear listener, are standing right at the edge of its door. You know, the story of the Priory of Sion doesn't start with secret codes or ancient symbols, it starts with a man named Simon de Montfort. He was a powerful noble in the 13th century, and he had a vision. He believed he'd been chosen by God to protect his sacred knowledge of the world. Simon gathered a group of trusted men, not just for war, but for something deeper. They were called the Knights Templar, but they had a secret mission to safeguard the wisdom of the ancients, passed down in hidden books and oral traditions. The priory was more than a fortress, it was a sanctuary for knowledge. Hidden in the hills of France, it became a refuge for scholars, mystics, and those who feared the church's wrath. Secrets were buried deep, not just in the earth, but in the hearts of those who protected them. But even the most secret places can't stay hidden forever. The Priory of Sion became a symbol of resistance, a place where truth and faith were entwined. And as the centuries passed, so did the stories of those who once called it home. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. The air was thick, like someone had just walked through a room and left the scent of old parchment and damp stone in their wake. It started with a whisper so soft you almost thought you were imagining it. But then you heard it again, just before the clock struck midnight, and you knew someone was listening. The first time the door creaked open by itself, you thought it was the wind, but the air was still, and the floorboards had never made that sound before. And then there was the smell, not the kind that lingers, but the kind that sticks to your bones, like the memory of something you once loved but lost. You told yourself it was just old buildings and overactive imaginations. But deep down, you knew something was waiting for you and you were running out of time. You remember how the wind always howled through the cloisters like a lost child calling for its mother. It was then, on the night of the 14th, that the last monk vanished, leaving only his rosary and a single, bloodless handprint on the stone wall. The search began at dawn, with candlelight flickering in the faces of the monks who had once prayed here. They found nothing but a trail of damp footprints leading to the crypt where silence had long since replaced the sound of prayer. They tried to bury the mystery with the man, but the crypt would not let go. The wind, the silence, the absence, these things lingered, and with them, the question that never left the lips of the last monk: what did he see in the dark before he was taken? To this day, the monks still pray for his return, though the wind no longer howls. It whispers now, a soft, steady breath against the stone, as if the man is still here, just beyond the reach of memory and light. I met a woman in Paris who swore the Priory's secrets followed her home. She said she saw a man in a black doublet at the edge of a garden, just before her car vanished into a mist. She told me the Priory isn't just a place, it's a memory that clings. You can't escape it, not really. It finds you when you least expect it. He described the air as thick, like it had weight. The stones hummed beneath his feet, and the wind carried voices that weren't his own. These aren't just stories. They're echoes, fragments of something deeper. The Priory isn't just history, it's a living thing, waiting to be heard. We followed the whispers of the past, tracing the Priory's path through dusty archives and candlelit chambers. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and something older, something that clung to the silence. One evening, we found a ledger, its pages brittle and yellowed. The ink had faded, but the names, some familiar, some not, spoke of a hidden network of trust and betrayal. What had they known that we did not? Then came the strange things: a compass that spun without wind, a mirror that showed reflections of people who weren't there, and a key that wouldn't fit any lock. The Priory had its own rules, and we were trespassing on sacred ground. The deeper we went, the more the walls seemed to close in. We began to wonder if the Priory had never truly been abandoned or if it had been waiting for someone to find it again. We were no longer just researchers. We were part of the story. And sometimes, the story doesn't end when you expect it to. You know, there's one detail that has never been explained. A whisper in the dark, a shadow on the wall. Something that just doesn't fit. It's like the puzzle is missing its final piece, and no one dares to ask why. It's not the location, not the people, not even the time. It's something deeper, something that lingers in the silence between the lines of history. Like a ghost in the archive, waiting to be heard. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dot smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Some say it's a name that should have been there but wasn't. Others say it's a date, a moment in time that just vanished. And still, no one has ever found the answer. So we sit here, with the story half told, the mystery still alive. You might wonder, did they hide it, or was it taken? And if it was taken, where did it go? You've heard the tales of the Priory of Sion, but what about the people who still live here? Some say the stones remember, and the old farmers swear they hear whispers in the wind when they're out at dusk. There's a local legend about a woman who vanished in the 1940s. Her name was Elsie, and she was last seen walking the path near the Priory. Some say she was taken by the spirits, others say she ran away with a man she loved. There's even a rumor that a hidden chamber still exists beneath the Priory, untouched by time. Some say it holds secrets the world isn't ready to know, and that the stones scarred them with their silence. And then there are the ones who say the Priory is just a place like any other, that the stories are just stories and the stones are just stones. But I wonder, if the wind carries a whisper, is it just the wind, or something more? You see, the truth about the Priory of Sion is still buried, like the bones beneath the soil. Some say it's a conspiracy, others a cover-up, but no one can say for sure what really happened. Every clue leads to more questions, and every answer just opens another door to the unknown. It's like trying to read a book written in a language that's been lost to time. And so, the mystery remains, not because it's forgotten, but because it's waiting for someone to listen, to dig deeper, to see beyond the surface of the earth and the silence of history. Maybe the truth is not in the books or the ruins, but in the stories we tell, the ones that refuse to die, the ones that linger in the dark, whispering their secrets to those who are willing to listen. You know, sometimes the most haunting stories are the ones we never finish telling, like the last whisper of a ghost in the wind, lingering just beyond our reach. The Priory of Sion may have buried its secrets, but they never truly vanish. They wait, like a shadow in the corner of your eye, ready to follow you home. And as you turn the page, the next story waits, just as silent and just as full of mystery. What will it be? So, I'll leave you with this. Sometimes the truth is buried not in the earth, but in the silence between the stories. Now, let's go find out what's waiting for us next. You ever heard of a place where secrets sleep beneath the stones? The Priory of Sion, nestled in the misty hills of France, whispers tales of hidden knowledge and ancient bloodlines. What do you suppose lies beneath its crumbling walls? It's not just a ruin, it's a place where time seems to pause, where the air is thick with the weight of centuries. What kind of secrets do you think might still be buried there, waiting to be unearthed? The air here feels different charged, like the walls themselves are holding their own breath. What do you imagine the first people who walked these stones felt as they uncovered the past? There's something about this place that lingers in the air, like a memory that refuses to fade. What do you think could have left such a deep mark on the land and its people? You know, the Priory of Sion wasn't just a secret society, it was a real place, tucked away in the French countryside, where whispers of ancient knowledge were passed down like heirlooms. You ever think about how some secrets are more valuable than gold? Founded in the 12th century, it was more than just a religious order. They were scholars, protectors of sacred texts, and keepers of a hidden lineage, some say even the descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. The Priory was no ordinary brotherhood, it was a network of thinkers and mystics, some of whom were accused of heresy for daring to preserve forbidden knowledge. You ever wonder how many truths were lost to time because they were too dangerous to share? Their mission was to guard the sacred, to protect the line of descent that some claimed was entrusted to them by Christ himself. And yet, in the end, they vanished like smoke, like a whisper in the wind. So, who were these people? And what exactly were they protecting? The answers lie buried in the past, waiting for someone brave enough to dig them up without getting lost along the way. You remember the first time you noticed something wasn't quite right? That subtle shift in the air, like the silence had thickened, and the shadows seemed to lean in just a little too close. It was the way the temperature dropped, just as you passed the old stone archway. You paused, thinking it was your imagination, but the chill was real, and it lingered in your bones. Then came the sound, soft, like a whisper just beyond the edge of hearing. You turned, but there was nothing, just the echo of your own breath in the stillness, and the feeling that someone was watching. The next morning, the caretaker found the first clue, a single, perfectly placed rose petal on the doorstep, as though someone had left it there with intention, not accident. You began to notice more of these things: faint scents of lavender in the air, the way the candles always burned just a little too long, and the way the walls seemed to breathe. You ever notice how some places hold secrets so deep they feel like they've been buried with the bones of the earth itself? The Priory of Sion was one of those places where history and mystery tangled like ivy on a crumbling wall. In the spring of 1965, a young woman named Isabelle de Montfort vanished without a trace. Her last known location was the Priory's ancient library, where she'd been researching the family's hidden past. The only clue was a single, blood-stained glove found in the library's hidden chamber, a chamber no one had entered in over a century. It was a message, or perhaps a warning, from someone who had seen too much. The glove was never matched to any known victim. Some say it was a trick, a red herring meant to stir up old fears. Others believe it was the last thing Isabelle touched before she disappeared, leaving behind a mystery that still lingers. To this day, the Priory of Sion holds its breath, waiting for someone to uncover the truth. But some secrets prefer to stay buried, just like the ones we can't quite reach. I remember the first time I heard the story of the Priory of Sion. A friend told me about a hidden manuscript, a secret society, and a whole world of conspiracy. But what really stuck with me was the way she described the silence of the old monastery, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The next account came from a retired librarian who claimed to have found the manuscript in the archives. She said the paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the words were still sharp as a knife. It wasn't just a book, she said. It was a warning. One of the most unsettling testimonies came from a former monk who had lived there for decades. He described the monastery as a place that remembered everything, every prayer, every secret, every sin. It doesn't forget, he said. It waits. Even the locals speak of it in hushed tones. Some say the Priory of Sion was never just a religious order. Some say it was a place where truth was buried, not just in the earth, but in the very walls. You can't just walk away from a secret like that. One farmer told me. It finds you. And then there are the whispers of voices in the night, of footsteps on stone, of a presence that doesn't belong to this world. Some say it's the ghosts of those who knew too much. Others say it's something older, something that has watched from the shadows for centuries. The first thing the investigators found was a ledger, yellowed and brittle, tucked inside a hollowed-out bookshelf. It listed names, dates, and odd symbols like a map of a mine. They couldn't read the symbols at first, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was the same as the journals found in the old chapel, like a secret language only the dead could speak. The team started noticing odd things: flickering lights, whispers in empty rooms, and a scent of lavender that never seemed to come from any source. It was as if the house was remembering. One investigator, a retired librarian, claimed to see a figure in the corner of the chapel. It wasn't a ghost, but something that looked like it had once been a person until it wasn't anymore. They tried to document everything, but the more they uncovered, the less they understood. The priory wasn't just haunted, it was holding onto something it wasn't meant to. You know, the one thing that's always bugged me about the Priory of Sion is this. No one ever explains why they moved the manuscripts in the first place. Did they think they were hiding from the wrong people? Or were they trying to protect something even they didn't fully understand? They had the knowledge, the resources, and the secrecy. But still, they left behind a trail of questions that no one has ever picked up. Like a puzzle box with only one piece missing. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dub Teth smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Maybe they didn't want to be found. Maybe they wanted to be forgotten. But the whispers never die, do they? They just change shape. And that's the one detail that's never been explained. Not by the scholars, not by the historians, not even by the ghosts who still haunt the place. It's like they left a clue, but no one knew to look. Or maybe they left it for someone who would never find it. You've heard the tales, but do you know what really happened here? The locals say the priory isn't just a ruin, it's a mirror to the past, to secrets buried in stone and silence. Some say the monks who lived here were cursed for their secrets. Others claim they vanished because they knew too much. And a few insist the priory was never a monastery at all, it was a place of darker purpose. Theories swirl like the mist outside. One says the priory was built on an ancient pagan site. Another claims it was a hiding place for forbidden books. And then there's the one no one dares to speak aloud, that the priory is still alive. And now, every time the wind howls through the valley, the locals say they hear whispers. Not from the wind, not from the trees, but from the stones themselves. What do you think they're saying? And so, we return to the question that has haunted scholars and skeptics alike. What really happened in the Priory of Sion? Did it vanish in a blaze of secrecy, or was it swallowed by time and myth? Some say it was a cover for a secret society, others that it was a refuge for a noble family in exile. But no one can say for sure. It's like trying to read a letter written in invisible ink. What if the truth is not buried at all, but waiting in plain sight? What if the real mystery isn't what happened, but why we're still chasing it after all these years? Perhaps the Priory of Sion was never about secrets, but about stories. And some stories, like the best ghost tales, refuse to let go of us. So, dear listener, what do you think? Was it a place, a people, or a mystery that outlives its time? And if you were to visit, where would you look first? You followed these threads through centuries of shadow and silence, and now, as the candlelight flickers, I wonder what will the next story whisper into your ear. The Priory's secrets may be buried, but the echoes of its past still linger in the stones, waiting for someone to listen. And when the next tale begins, I hope you'll lean in just a little closer, like you're about to share a secret with a friend who's been waiting a long time. Until then, may your dreams be filled with stories, and your nights be soft with the hum of old ghosts. Good night, and remember, some mysteries are meant to be told, not solved. You've heard of the Royal Hospital, Chelsea, haven't you? That grand old place where soldiers once found peace and quiet after a long, hard life. But there's a part of it they don't talk about much, its crypts. They say the air there is thick with whispers of the past. The crypts are hidden beneath the hospital's foundation, where time seems to stand still. Some say the stone walls are so cold, they can still feel the chill of the centuries. Others say the silence is too loud. The rumors started after a few of the hospital's staff began to experience strange things, cold spots, voices in the night, and a feeling of being watched. They say the crypts have a will of their own, and they're not happy about the modern world above. No one knows exactly what happened there in the past, but the stories are as old as the stones. Some say it's the souls of the dead who refused to rest. Others say it's the weight of history that keeps them trapped. And now, as the sun sets over the hospital, the crypts are quiet again, but the air is heavy with something you can't quite put your finger on. Are you listening? I think I hear the wind whispering something. You know, the Royal Hospital Chelsea wasn't built for kings or queens, but for those who served them. It started as a promise, a vow to give those who fought for the crown a place to rest and a little bit of dignity. It was the late 1600s, and the British Army had just returned from the wars. Many were injured, many were broken, and the crown decided to do something about it. They built a place where the brave could live out their days in peace. In the 1700s, the hospital became a beacon for veterans. Men who had marched through the mud and blood of war found a home here, where the only battles were with time and pain. But even then, the ghosts of war followed them. The hospital grew, and so did the need for more space. They started digging beneath the earth, building crypts where the dead could rest and the living could find solace. But some say the crypts were never just for the dead. This place was meant to be a refuge, a place where the weary and the broken could find rest. But even in the best of times, there are those who are never truly at peace. And in the quiet corners of Chelsea, some still wait for their stories to be told. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. That strange chill, the way the air just seemed to hold its breath before the lights flickered. It wasn't just the lights. The whispers started then too, faint, like the rustle of old parchment, just on the edge of hearing. You looked around, but no one was there. The silence was too thick, like it had been waiting for you to notice. That was the first time you felt the weight of something unseen pressing against your chest, like the walls were closing in. You told yourself it was just old buildings and tired stories. But deep down, you knew something had changed, and it wasn't just the weather. You ever wonder what happens when a building holds more secrets than the people who built it? The Royal Hospital Chelsea, with its creaking corridors and whispering stone, has a history that's as heavy as the dust that settles on its forgotten rooms. Back in the 1700s, the hospital was a place of healing. But the stories say it was also where the line between care and cruelty blurred. Some say the patients were treated like animals, and others say the staff were driven mad by the silence of the dead. One night, a staff member claimed to hear voices, not of the living, but of the dead. They spoke in a language no one could understand, and they warned of a coming reckoning. No one believed her. They just called it a nervous breakdown. And then, the final disappearance. A patient who had been missing for weeks was found. Not in the hospital, but in the crypt below. They were still alive, but their eyes were lifeless, and their hands were bound with rope. It was as if they had been there all along. To this day, the hospital still watches the city. You can hear the whispers in the wind, the footsteps in the halls, and the echoes of a past that refuses to stay buried. You can almost feel it, the weight of history pressing down, waiting for the next silence to break. I remember the first time I heard about the Chelsea crypts. A woman in a cardigan, eyes wide, said she saw a figure in the dark, just a flicker of movement, like a shadow given shape. She insisted it wasn't just her imagination. It was there, behind the tombstones, she said, like someone was watching, waiting for the right moment to appear. One visitor claimed to hear a child's voice calling from the depths. It wasn't loud, just a whisper, like it was trying to be heard, but not quite. Another said the air turned cold the moment they crossed the threshold. It wasn't the chill of the stone, it was like the cold was coming from the walls themselves. And then there's the one who swore he saw a hand reach out from the crypt. It was just a hand, but it was alive. Like it was trying to grab me, but it never touched. We started with the basics: old records, faded blueprints, and the faint scent of damp stone that clung to the air like a memory. The hospital was once a place of healing, now a graveyard of secrets waiting to be unearthed. One of the first clues was a faded newspaper clipping from 1947, mentioning a nurse who vanished during a night shift. The article described a sudden, unexplained departure in a locked room with no sign of struggle. As we ventured deeper, the air grew colder and the walls seemed to breathe. We found a hidden passage behind a loose brick, leading to a small, sealed room with a single, empty bed and a rusted iron cot. The final discovery was the most unsettling: a sealed diary, tucked beneath the floorboards. Its pages were filled with frantic scribbles, detailing a final night of terror and a desperate plea for help that was never answered. Even now, the crypts whisper, not with malice, but with a deep, aching sorrow. They remind us that some stories never end, and some secrets are meant to be found, not forgotten. You know, the thing that's been gnawing at the edges of every investigation, the one detail that just won't die? It's not the ghost, not the history, not even the rumors. It's the silence. The silence that follows every time someone tries to dig deeper. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dove to the smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. They say the crypt was built in the 1600s, but no one can confirm when exactly the final burial took place. The records are missing, the names are blurred, and the only thing that's clear is that no one ever wanted to talk about it. Some say it's a secret burial site for those who died in the hospital's early days. Others claim it's a cover-up for something far darker, but no one knows for sure. And that's the part that haunts them most. You ever wonder why the story never ends? Why the silence lingers? Maybe it's not the ghost we should be afraid of. Maybe it's the truth that's been buried for centuries, waiting for someone to ask the right question. The truth is out there, somewhere in the dark, but until someone dares to look, it'll always remain just out of reach. And that, my friends, is the real curse. You know, some folks say the whispers in the halls are just the wind. They're the voices of the ones who never left. The patients, the staff, the very builders who sealed their fate in stone. There's a rumor that the last living patient, a woman named Alina, died in her bed, but her ghost still lingers in the chapel, whispering to the new arrivals. Others think the curse is a punishment for the hospital's past. It was once a place of healing, but it also took lives. Maybe the ghosts are just remembering how it felt to be forgotten. And then there are the ones who say it's not the dead who haunt this place, it's the living. The ones who still come here, still come looking for answers, still come to remember. There's a question that lingers in the air, like a whisper from the past. What exactly happened in that crypt? No one knows for sure, and that's what makes it so haunting. Some say the missing bodies were never found. Others say they were taken by something more sinister. But the truth, It's still buried, just like the secrets of the past. We've searched the archives, talked to the historians, and even visited the site. But the mystery remains because sometimes the past doesn't want to be found. So as we wrap up our tale, I'll leave you with this. The crypts may be silent now, but the questions are far from over. And sometimes, that's the most terrifying thing of all. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. And the Royal Hospital Chelsea? It's not just a building, it's a memory, a story, a whisper that lingers long after the last patient has left. But I wonder, what if the ghosts here aren't just of the past? What if they're still waiting, still watching, for someone to listen, for someone to remember? So, as we turn the page, I leave you with this: what if the past isn't truly gone? What if it's just waiting for the right moment to speak again? Now, let's go deeper into the crypts and see what lies beneath the silence. You've heard of the Cold War, but have you ever wondered what happened to those who fled just before it all began? The Sudetenland refugees, poised on the edge of history, caught between two worlds. This place, once a quiet town in Czechoslovakia, now stands as a ghostly echo of a time when fear and hope walked hand in hand. The air here carries the weight of unsung stories. Now, decades later, the town is silent, but the memory of those who vanished lingers in the wind. You can almost hear them whispering through the snow. It's not just the cold that chills you here, it's the silence. The way the air feels heavy, like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And so we begin our journey through the forgotten stories of the Sudetenland refugees, those who fled, those who vanished, and the eerie silence that remains in their wake. You know, it all started in 1945, just after the war ended. The world was still in pieces, and the Allies had a plan to divide up the spoils. But in Czechoslovakia, something very different was about to happen. The British, Americans, and Soviets each claimed a piece of the land, but the Sudetenland, those mountainous regions along the German border, was the prize. It was a place of deep pride for the Czechs and deep resentment for the Germans. As the war came to an end, the Sudetenland was handed over to Czechoslovakia, but not without resistance. The people there, many of whom had lived there for generations, were not so easily displaced. What followed was a series of forced evacuations, mass arrests, and violent uprisings. The refugees who escaped were often left without homes, jobs, or even their own names. Some said they were sent to the east, others said they were sent to the west. And so, the Sudetenland refugees were born not by choice, but by the cruel logic of a world still in pieces. Their story is one of loss, of fear, of being left behind in a place that no longer belonged to them. You remember the way the air felt in those days, thick with the scent of rain and the promise of something coming. The first signs were subtle, like a whisper of wind through the trees, or the way the sun would vanish behind a cloud just as the children were about to go outside. The adults started noticing things: doors that closed on their own, voices in the night that weren't theirs, and the way the old photographs seemed to shift when you looked at them too long. It was like the house was remembering something it had long forgotten. The children were the first to feel it. They would wake up with the smell of smoke in their mouths, or hear the distant sound of a melody they'd never heard before. They didn't know what it was, but it made their hearts race, like they were being watched. It was the kind of silence that made your skin crawl. The kind that didn't belong to the world you knew, but to something older, something that had been waiting for someone to remember it again. And then, one night, the first thing was no longer a whisper, it was a scream, and it was coming from inside the house, from the very walls that had held them safe for so long. You know, it wasn't the cold that took them, but the silence. The kind that wraps around you like a shroud, pressing in from all sides, as if the world had forgotten to breathe. One moment they were packing their belongings, whispering last goodbyes, the next nothing. Just a room left behind, untouched, as if time had paused mid-sentence. They didn't vanish in a flash. They faded, like shadows dissolving into the dark, leaving behind only the scent of perfume, the faint sound of a lullaby, and the taste of a promise unkept. And then, nothing. Just the empty space, the unanswered question, and the unrelenting hush of a world that once held them, but no longer does. I've heard the stories from the survivors themselves, some still living, some long past. One woman told me that the air in the camp smelled like burnt hair and something sweet, like sugar mixed with blood. Another man claimed he saw a child with no face, wandering the camp like a ghost. He said it would stop at his feet and look at him, then vanish into the fog that clung to the ground like a living thing. There's a woman who swore she heard a lullaby at night, soft and sweet, coming from a tent where no one had lived for years. She said the melody would fade as she tried to follow it, leaving only silence and a cold sweat on her skin. Some say the refugees didn't just vanish, they were taken. One man told me he saw a line of people disappearing into the woods, like they were being pulled by invisible hands. He never told anyone, not even his wife. These aren't just stories. They're echoes of a time when fear and desperation were the only things that kept people alive. And now, they're all that's left. The investigators came with notebooks and a quiet reverence, not expecting to find much. But what they found was more than they bargained for. One file, in particular, caught their eye marked Sudetenland, 1946. Inside was a photograph of a young woman, her face pale and haunted, standing in front of a crumbling house. They followed the clues to the outskirts of town, where the house had once stood. The locals whispered about it, but no one would say much. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and something older, something that hadn't been disturbed in decades. It felt like the house was still breathing. As they stepped inside, the silence was so complete it felt like a presence was watching them. The walls seemed to hum with a memory they couldn't quite place. You ever wonder what makes a story stick? Not the screams, not the blood, but the silence. The one thing that no one ever talks about. The one detail that has never been explained. It's the red coat. The one thing they all saw. The one thing they all remember. But no one can say for sure what happened to her. Was she lost? Or did she run, and the world just forgot to look back? And that's the thing. The one detail that has never been explained. The one thing that haunts the air. The one thing that lingers in the hearts of those who remember. You ever wonder what it's like to be the last one to see someone? To know they were there, and then not. That's the real horror. Not the ghosts. Not the screams. Just the silence. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The one detail that has never been explained. That's what we're left with. The red coat, the silence, and the story that's never quite finished. You've heard the stories, but let me tell you what the locals still whisper. They say the forest holds their memories, not just their bones. The trees know who they were. Some say the refugees are still here, waiting for the day the world remembers them. Others claim they're not spirits, but the echoes of a tragedy that never made it into the history books. One old woman in the village insists the refugees didn't vanish, they were taken. By force, by fear, by a system that refused to see them as people. She still carries their stories in her head. And then there are the ones who say the forest itself is alive, that guard their memory. That every time a leaf falls, it's a sigh from the past. That the woods are full of them still. You know, sometimes the hardest part isn't the ghost, it's the silence. The kind that lingers like a question, unanswered, in the air. We've scoured every report, every name, every missing person file. But the truth, it's like a whisper in the dark just out of reach. But the real mystery isn't just who they were, it's who they became. And what they left behind in the silence. So here's the thing, dear listeners, some stories don't end. They just wait for you. And when they do, they'll tell you everything. You ever notice how the wind seems to carry whispers when you're alone? It's like it's trying to tell you something you're not meant to hear. Sometimes the past isn't so far away, it just waits for you to look down the right path. And sometimes, the most haunting stories are the ones that never get told. So, I'll leave you with this, the past isn't gone. It's just waiting for the right moment to come back. You've heard of the Priory of Sion, haven't you? A place that's more legend than history, but still, it whispers through the stones like a forgotten lullaby. Nestled in the hills of southern France, it's said to be older than the church itself, built by a secret brotherhood of scholars and mystics who vanished without a trace. What remains is more mystery than monument, but the air here feels different, like the past is still breathing in the silence. And if you listen closely, you might hear the echo of footsteps in the empty halls just before the silence returns. So, what do you think? Is it a place of secrets, or just the wind playing tricks on an old stone? You've heard of the Priory of Sion, but do you know where it all began? It started in the 12th century, in a quiet village near the Pyrenees. A knight named Raymond, tired of war, sought peace in the mountains. He built a place of refuge for the poor and the outcast. Raymond wasn't just a warrior, he was a man of faith and vision. He gathered monks, scholars, and even a few skeptics, all drawn by his promise of spiritual and intellectual freedom. They called it the Priory of Sion, a place where truth and mystery could coexist. The priory became more than a place of worship, it was a hidden sanctuary for those who dared to question the church. It housed secret manuscripts, forbidden knowledge, and a growing network of allies across Europe. But secrets have a way of getting out, and so did the priory's reputation. By the 14th century, the priory had become a target. Inquisitors came, seeking heresy, and the priory's defenders had no choice but to vanish into the night. Some say they escaped, others say they were burned alive. But the priory itself remained, waiting in silence for the next seeker of truth. You know how sometimes, in the quietest moments, the house seems to hold its breath? That's what it felt like that night, like the air had been stolen, and the silence was too loud. The first thing I noticed was the smell, like old paper, and something just a little too sweet. It clung to the air, thick and heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. Then came the voices, not loud, not clear, but there, whispering in the corners of the room, just out of reach, like the house was trying to tell us something we weren't ready to hear. It was then I realized the light had changed, not just dimmer, but wrong, like the sun had turned its back on us, and the world had gone gray and heavy with the weight of unspoken secrets. And in that silence, something shifted, not in the air, but in the space between us and the walls. Like the house itself was listening, waiting for us to remember what we'd forgotten. You remember the last time the moon was so low, it seemed to hang over the priory's crumbling walls. It was the night the silence turned to something else entirely. The last priest, Father Elias, was found in the chapel, his hands pressed against the altar as if trying to hold the silence back. No one heard him scream. They found the bell's echo still lingering in the air, like a whisper that wouldn't let go. The villagers say it's the sound of something still inside the walls. No one knows what happened that night, but the silence that followed was louder than any scream. And the echo? It never stopped. I've spoken to several people who claim to have seen the priory at night, but none of them can agree on what they saw. One said it looks like a medieval castle, another said it was a crumbling ruin with ivy climbing up like veins. One man swore he saw a light flickering from a high window, like a candle burning in a dark cathedral. He said it vanished when he tried to approach, leaving only the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the trees. There's a woman who says she heard voices in the night, her own name, whispered over and over. She didn't go back, but she said the voices stopped when she left, and the silence was louder than the noise. Another visitor said the ground itself seemed to shift beneath their feet, as if the earth was breathing. They found a stone with a carved symbol, and said it felt warm to the touch, like it was alive. And then there are those who never came back. Some say the priory takes what it wants, and once you're inside, you don't leave the same person you arrived as. We began the investigation with a simple plan, to walk the grounds and listen. It was quiet, almost too quiet, like the trees were holding their breath. The air smelled like damp earth and something older, like the scent of time itself. Every step seemed to echo, but not the way you'd expect. It was like the ground was speaking back. One night, the wind howled like a wounded animal, and the trees whispered in a language we couldn't understand. It wasn't the wind. It was something else, watching. We found a hidden chamber beneath the chapel, with symbols etched into the stone. The air was thick, and the silence was louder than any sound. The deeper we went, the more we realized the past was never truly gone. It was waiting, patient, for someone to listen. You know, there's one thing that's never made sense to me. The one detail that no one ever talks about, yet it's the most important part of the whole story. It's not the missing letters, or the secret codes, or even the lost manuscripts. It's the fact that no one ever found the body. Not a single one. Just silence. I've read every account, every rumor, every whispered legend. And yet, there's always one question that lingers. What happened to the body that was never found? Maybe the answer isn't in the pages or the stones. Maybe it's in the silence. The silence that lingers, the silence that waits. And sometimes, silence is the loudest whisper of all. You've heard the tales, but have you ever wondered what the locals truly think? Some say the priory's ghosts are just the echoes of the past. Others whisper that the stones themselves are alive, waiting to be awakened. There's a belief that the priory was built on an ancient site, a place where the veil between worlds is thin. Some say the monks who lived there were not monks at all, but something else entirely. Some say the priory still holds its secrets, and that those who dare to dig too deep will find more than they bargained for. But then again, who's to say what they found in the first place? In the end, the truth may never be known, but if you're ever passing through, listen closely. Sometimes the stones speak, and they don't like to be ignored. And so, we return to the question that haunts the very stones of this place. What happened to the last of the Sion bloodline? No body was ever found, no grave was ever dug. Just silence and the echo of a name that refuses to fade. Some say the family was taken by the land itself, a curse that lingers in the blood. Others whisper that the last heir vanished into the very heart of the mountain, where no one has dared to search since. But the truth, my dear friends, remains just out of reach, like the whisper of a ghost in the wind, or the distant sound of footsteps on wet stone, just before the door slams shut. And that, my friends, is why the Priory of Sion still lingers in the hearts of those who dare to listen. A place where history, legend, and the unknown all converge in one haunting, unresolved whisper. You've walked with me through the shadows of the Priory of Sion, through whispers of ancient secrets and echoes of the past. But the road ahead is still long, and the stories never truly end. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Sometimes, the most haunting stories are the ones we carry with us long after the last light fades. And sometimes, the silence speaks louder than any scream. Stay curious, stay cautious, and may your nights be filled with dreams, some of them, perhaps, not so sweet. Until next time, dear listeners, the stories are never done, and the echoes, they are always waiting. You ever heard of a place where time stands still, and the walls whisper secrets to those who dare listen? That place is Eastern State Penitentiary, where the echoes of despair still linger in the cold stone. Built in the 1820s, it was meant to be a model of reform, but instead, it became a prison of the soul. The air here feels heavier, like the weight of all the lost souls who once called this place home. People say the voices you hear aren't just echoes, they're the last gasps of the condemned, trapped between the world they left and the silence that follows. It's not just the ghosts that haunt this place, it's the memory of pain, the sound of silence, and the truth that some stories never die, they just get colder. You know, the Eastern State Penitentiary wasn't built to house ghosts. It was built to house men, and men, you see, were the first ghosts it ever made. In 1829, a group of reformers, led by that very same governor, thought they'd made a bold move. They'd built a prison that promised to reform the soul, not just the body. The governor, a man with a heart full of idealism and a mind full of rules, believed in punishment as a form of salvation. But he didn't realize that salvation could be a kind of torment. And so, the Eastern State Penitentiary was born, not as a place of hope, but as a place where men were made to suffer and where the walls would eventually remember every scream and every silence. You ever notice how the wind seems to change when you're in a place that's been forgotten? Well, I did, and it was the first thing that made me think something wasn't quite right. One evening, as I was walking the grounds, I heard a sound like someone shuffling through paper. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the echo of footsteps. It was something else entirely. It wasn't just the symbol. The air felt heavier, like the weight of 1,000 silent eyes watching from the shadows. You could feel it in your bones. I started to wonder if the stories were true, or if the stories were just the whispers of something that never left. And that's when I realized this place wasn't just haunted, it was waiting. You ever think about how silence can be louder than screams? That's the sound of the Eastern State Penitentiary in the hours after the last prisoner left, when the walls held their breath and the wind carried the weight of forgotten sins. The night of April 19, 1924, was the last time anyone heard from Thomas J. Bowers, a prisoner who vanished without a trace. Some say he was murdered, others whisper that he was taken by the place itself. The prison had a way of taking men like they were never meant to leave. Some say Bowers was caught in the walls, his soul bound to the stone, his fate sealed by the silence that once echoed through those halls. And to this day, if you're ever alone in the dark, you might hear the echo of a man's voice, calling out from the depths of the prison, calling for help, or maybe just calling out for someone to listen. I've spoken to a few folks who claim to have seen the ghost of a man in a striped uniform walking the cell block at night. One said he was just a shadow, but another swore he was looking right at her, his eyes cold and empty. There's also the tale of a woman who heard a child crying in the East Wing. She called for help, but no one answered. The cries stopped when she turned around, and the wing was silent, just like it had been. One guard said he saw a pair of hands reaching through the bars of a cell, clutching at nothing. He didn't report it, just kept walking, but his hands shook for days afterward. And then there's the man who claimed he saw a woman in a white dress pacing the courtyard, her head bowed, her hands clasped. He said she looked like she was waiting for someone who was never coming. These accounts are scattered like whispers through time, some vague, some hauntingly specific. What do they mean? Are they echoes of the past, or something more? We followed the trail of whispers to the basement, where the air felt like it had been frozen in time. The floorboards groaned beneath our boots, as if remembering every step taken before. The first thing we found was a rusted iron key, lying in the mud like it had been waiting for someone to find it. It was heavy, cold, and bore a strange, almost ritualistic engraving. We found a stack of yellowed letters tucked beneath a loose floorboard. They were written in a careful, looping script, and though they were decades old, they felt like they had been waiting to be read. The letters spoke of a man who had been here, a prisoner who had been broken and then forgotten. He wrote of dreams that felt more real than waking life, and of voices that called to him from the walls. One letter, however, was different. It had been written in red ink, and the message was barely legible. The words seemed to shift when you looked at them, like they were trying to escape the page. We left the basement with more questions than answers, the weight of the past pressing on our shoulders. The Eastern State Penitentiary had a story to tell, and it was still waiting for someone to listen. You've heard the stories about the screams that echo through the stone, but there's one detail that has never been explained. The exact moment the screams started. No one knows if it was the night the prison first opened, or the night the last man died, or maybe it was the night the doors were sealed for good. They say the prisoners were kept in silence, but silence doesn't explain the screams. Maybe the prison itself learned to scream first, and it's been waiting for someone to listen. You ever wonder how something built to silence men could end up being the loudest voice of all? The records are full of names, but not one of them tells you what happened on that one night. No one was ever found. No one was ever questioned. Just silence and a ledger that never closed. And now, the prison is asking for answers. You think you know what haunted places are. But what if the most haunted thing is the thing that never happened? The moment that never came? The scream that never ended? That's the one detail that has never been explained. You've heard the tales, But have you ever wondered what it's like to walk where the echoes of the past still linger? Some say the walls are alive, not with voices, but with the weight of what happened here. Local legends say the worst punishment was not the chains or the silence, but the cold deep, unrelenting, and waiting for the soul to freeze in place. Some say the chill is still there, just beneath the floorboards. There are those who believe the souls of the condemned still wander these halls, searching for a way out. Some say they're trapped. Others say they're waiting for someone to listen. And then there are the theories. Some say the prison itself is cursed. Others say the cold was a form of punishment, or maybe even a warning. But no one knows for sure. That's what makes it so haunting. So next time you pass by, ask yourself, what do you hear? The wind or something else? And if you do, don't be surprised if the cold gets a little colder. You've heard the whispers, felt the chill, but there's one question that lingers. What happened to the last man to vanish from these halls? No body, no clues, just silence. The guards say he was last seen heading for the East Wing, a place they never speak of. Some say he was a prisoner. Others say he was a guard who never returned. The truth is buried, like the man himself. The state tried to forget this place, but the past has a way of coming back. Maybe the man never left. Maybe he is still here, waiting for someone to listen. And so, the prison sleeps, but the questions remain. What happened to him? And why does the wind still howl through those empty cells as if whispering his name? You've heard the whispers of steel and stone, felt the cold breath of history in every corner. But what if the true horror isn't in the past, but in the silence that follows? The walls remember more than they should. They hold stories that no one asked for, and they never let go. Sometimes, the worst things are the ones we can't see. Some places don't just haunt you, they change you. And if you listen closely, you might just hear the echo of a voice that's still waiting to be heard. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a feeling the next story is waiting for you. And it's not going to be very polite. You've heard of the Ritz Paris, right? That grand old place where the glittering elite once danced beneath chandeliers that shivered like trapped stars. But what if I told you the same halls that echoed with laughter now whisper with something else? Back in the early 1900s, the Ritz was more than a hotel. It was a stage for the world's most glamorous secrets. Think of the Marquise de Castellane, the Countess of Laval, and the mysterious disappearance of a young pianist in the early 1920s. Rumors say she was never seen again. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You might say the Ritz was a place of excess, but behind the velvet curtains and the champagne flutes, there were whispers of betrayal, poison, and secrets that never left the walls. Some say the very air still carries the scent of something old, something that never quite left. And now you're here, listening to the story of a place that once made people feel alive, and now you're wondering if it still makes them feel something else. You know, back in the 1890s, Paris was a city of dreams and daring, and the Ritz was where the elite came to chase both. It wasn't just a hotel, it was a stage, a ballroom, a place where the rich danced on the edge of decadence and danger. The Ritz wasn't just built for the elite, it was designed to impress them. The owner, Cesar Ritz, had a vision to create a sanctuary where the world's most powerful could come, relax, and be seen as if they were royalty. But behind the elegance, there was a darker side. The Ritz wasn't just a place of luxury, it was a place where secrets were buried and the wealthy played games with fate. And then there was the mystery of the missing guests, those who vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers and unanswered questions. The Ritz became a place where the rich came to escape their problems, but sometimes they brought their problems with them. And sometimes, the problems wouldn't let them go. You remember the first time you heard the laughter, didn't you? It wasn't the kind of laughter that comes from a champagne flute or a tango, but something colder, something that lingered just long enough to unsettle you. The sound came from the ceiling, like it was being echoed from above, not from the dancers below. It was the kind of laughter that made your spine tingle, like someone had reached into your ribs and plucked the nerves. Then came the silence. Not the kind that follows a slow dance, but the kind that swallows sound. That makes your breath catch in your throat as if the room itself had turned its back on you. You could feel it in your bones. Something had changed. Something had moved. And it wasn't just the music anymore. It was something else. Something that had been waiting, watching, and now it was listening. You ever wonder what happens when a ballroom gets too loud, too long, and the music starts to feel like a warning? The Ritz Paris had that kind of energy, elegant, but with a whisper of something darker. In the early 1900s, a young American heiress vanished without a trace during a lavish ball. They say the music stopped mid-chorus, and the dancers froze like statues, eyes locked on a door. The police found no clues, no bodies, just a trail of broken glass and a single rose left on the dance floor. The rose was wilted, as if it had been there for days. Some say the heiress was taken by the ghost of a previous guest, a woman who died in the same ballroom decades before. Others whisper it was a secret society meeting in plain sight, masking something far more sinister. And to this day, the Ritz Paris still plays a waltz in the dead of night, just loud enough to be heard over the hum of the city. but quiet enough to make you question if you're truly alone. Some say the ballrooms of the Ritz Paris still echo with the laughter of the lost. A guest once claimed to see a woman in a silver gown, her face obscured by a veil of mist, dancing alone in the moonlight. Another guest swore he heard a voice calling his name, only to find himself alone in the grand staircase, the footsteps behind him fading into the silence of the past. A chef once told me he saw a shadow move in the kitchen, just before a guest collapsed from an unknown illness. The chef said the shadow looked like a woman in mourning, her dress stained with something dark. Some believe the Ritz is haunted by the memory of a tragic love affair, a romance that ended in blood and betrayal. They say the walls remember every whispered promise and broken vow. And then there's the most unsettling story of all, a ghost who never left. A woman who died in the ballroom, her body never found, her name whispered in the wind like a lullaby. The investigators arrived with notebooks and a deep sense of reverence, like walking into a cathedral of ghosts. They had heard the stories, but nothing prepared them for the silence that wrapped around them like a shroud. They found the first clue in a hidden compartment beneath the stage, filled with faded photographs and a single, unmarked envelope. It was as if the past had been trying to speak, but no one was listening. Inside, they found a list of names, some familiar, others long forgotten. Names of dancers, musicians, and patrons, all marked with dates that didn't match the official records. It was like the past had been rewritten, or worse, erased. One name stood out, though it was written in a way that felt almost alive. It was a name that had been buried in the city's memory, but not in the way you'd expect. It was as if the past had not just been forgotten, but silenced. They tried to follow the trail, but the deeper they went, the more the clues led them in circles. It was as if the building itself was trying to protect the truth, or perhaps keep it from being known. You know, there's one thing about the Ritz Paris that's never been explained, and it's not the blood stains, or the missing guests, or even the rumors of a secret room. It's the fact that no one ever found the original champagne fountain. You see, the fountain was supposed to be a centerpiece of the ballroom, a symbol of luxury and life. But when the Ritz opened in 1903, it was already missing. Some say it was stolen. Others say it was never there to begin with. What's strange is that no one seems to remember what the fountain looked like. No photographs, no sketches, no mention in any of the archives. It was just gone, like it was never part of the Ritz at all. And yet, every time someone claims to have seen it, they describe something different. Some say it's made of crystal, others say it's carved from bone. And there's always the same question: why was it never found? And why does it still seem to be here, watching? You've heard the stories about the Ritz Paris, but what about the locals? Some say the ghosts of the lost dancers still sway in the ballroom, their silk gowns trailing like ghosts in the wind. Others believe the true horror lies in the war years, the blood that soaked the floors during the Nazi occupation, the whispers of betrayal and silence that never left the walls. Some say the Ritz is cursed, that the spirits of the lost and the lonely still haunt the corridors, waiting for the right moment to slip through the veil. But then again, maybe it's not the ghosts that linger. Maybe it's the memories of the people who once danced here, who once laughed, who once lived, and then were gone. So, what do you think? Is the Ritz Paris a place of beauty, or is it a tomb for the souls who once called it home? You know, some mysteries don't just fade with time, they cling to the walls, waiting for someone to finally listen. And the Ritz Paris? It's still whispering, still holding its breath. The police closed the case years ago, but the rumors never stopped. Some say the blood was real, others say it was a trick of the light. But none of it matters now, does it? You ever wonder what it feels like to be forgotten by history, to be erased from the record, yet never truly gone? The Ritz Paris still remembers, and it's waiting for the right person to ask the right questions. So, if you ever find yourself standing in that ballroom, don't be surprised if you hear laughter soft, distant, like a memory just out of reach. That's the Ritz Paris. It's not done with us yet. You know, sometimes the most chilling stories are the ones that don't have a single ghost in them, just echoes of lives once lived, and the weight of history pressing down like a velvet shroud. The Ritz Paris may have been a place of glamour, but even the grandest halls can hold secrets that time refuses to let go. They whisper, you know, just a little. And as you walk through those doors, remember this: beauty and tragedy are often two sides of the same coin. The Ritz may have been a palace, but it was also a place where dreams ended. So, as we wrap up this tale, I leave you with the question: what do you think lingers in the shadows of places like this? In memory? A warning? Or something far more sinister? Stay warm, stay curious, and until next time, remember that the best stories are the ones that keep you up at night. You've heard of haunted churches, but Blithburgh Church, that's a place that whispers secrets in the wind. It's in Suffolk, England, a quiet town where time seems to pause and the air is heavy with the weight of centuries. The church is ancient, built in the 11th century, and it's got a reputation for being more than just a place of worship. Some say the echoes of the past still linger in its pews, and the choir's disappearance is the most chilling mystery of all. Quick word from our sponsor: if this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV's Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You ever notice how some places hold secrets so deep, they whisper through the cracks in the stone? Blithburgh Church isn't just a building, it's a book, and the choir was the last page that vanished. The choir was more than music. They were the heart of the village. Every Sunday, they'd gather in that old church, their voices weaving through the rafters like a sacred thread. Some say the choir was taken by the ghosts of those who died in the church before, old, forgotten souls who couldn't rest. Others say it was something more personal. What we do know is this: the choir vanished and the church became a place of quiet dread. Every Sunday still comes, but the voices, they never return. You know how sometimes the quietest moments are the most unsettling? Well, the first real sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday, when the choir didn't show up for rehearsal. No one called, no one knocked, just silence. The organist tried to play, but the keys didn't respond. The music stopped mid-note, like the world itself had held its breath. The air was thick, heavy, and smelled faintly of damp stone and old incense. They tried to open the doors, but they wouldn't budge. The wood groaned, like it was resisting something or someone inside. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath. And then, just as the sun began to rise, the bells started to ring quietly, like a whisper, not a bell. One by one, they tolled, each note echoing through the empty pews and into the silence that had settled over the church. It was then that the parishioners realized the true weight of the silence, not just of absence, but of something watching, waiting, and finally, speaking. You see it now, don't you? The choir boys, all in their little black robes, standing in perfect formation, their voices rising like a prayer. But then silence. A silence so deep, it swallowed the sound of their own hymns. The vicar, standing at the back, clutches his chest. His face is pale, his hands trembling. He looks around, searching for the source of the void, but there's nothing. Just stillness. I spoke to an elderly woman who said she saw a figure in the choir loft, just before the last boy vanished. She swore it was a child, but dressed in a way that made her uneasy. She said the boy didn't move, just stood there, silent and still, until the bells rang and he disappeared into the rafters like smoke. Another witness claimed to hear the boys singing at night, but with a strange, low hum that made their voices sound like they were coming from underwater. One man said he saw a shadowy figure in the nave, just before the last disappearance. He didn't know who it was, but he knew it was watching. These testimonies are the only clues left, and they all point to something, watching, waiting, and never letting go. The first thing the investigators noticed was how quiet the church was, even when it wasn't empty. You could hear the wind whispering through the rafters, like it was trying to tell a secret only the choir could understand. They found old records, but the names were faded, and the dates didn't match. One entry just said, "The choir vanished on the night of the storm." It felt like a warning, not a report. They uncovered a strange pattern every time the choir was supposed to sing. Something went wrong. A missing hymn, a missing bell, a missing voice. It felt like the church itself was holding its breath. One investigator found a sealed envelope tucked behind the altar. Inside was a note written in a shaky hand. "They're not gone, they're waiting for the storm to end." And then, there was the silence. Not just the silence of an empty church, but the silence of something that had been there all along, watching, waiting, and never leaving. You know, the one thing that's really bugged historians is this: no one ever found the choir boys' choir robes. Not one stitch. Just the empty pews and the cold quiet of a church that's been sitting there, waiting. You'd think, with all the searching, someone would have found a single button or a thread. But no, it's like they vanished along with the boys. Just gone. Like the church itself swallowed them whole. And here's the kicker: every time they've looked, they've found nothing. Not even a single thread. Just silence, and the sound of wind whispering through the rafters like it's trying to say something. So now you're wondering, did they really vanish, or did they just fade away? Like the church itself is holding its breath, waiting for the truth to finally come out. And you can't help but think, what if the church's silence isn't just about the past? What if it's still waiting for someone to listen? Some say the choir vanished because they were cursed by the very stones they sang to. Others claim they were taken by the ghost of a long-dead priest who once haunted the pews. There's even a local legend that the voices of the choir still echo in the rafters at midnight, though no one's ever been brave enough to listen. Theories range from supernatural forces to simple tragedies. Some believe the choir was caught in a storm and lost at sea, while others insist the church itself swallowed them whole. But no one really knows. And maybe that's why the story lies on, whispered in the quiet hours when the lights are low and the wind whispers secrets. Even now, decades later, the mystery of the Blithburgh choir lingers like a whispered secret in the wind. No one knows for sure what happened that night, and that's what makes it so haunting. Some say the church itself holds the answer, that the walls still remember the sound of those voices and the silence that followed. Others say the truth is buried under layers of time and fear. Every year, on the anniversary of the vanishing, some locals still gather at the church hoping for a sign. But the silence only deepens and the mystery remains unsolved. Perhaps the truth is never meant to be found. Maybe the choir's disappearance is a reminder that some mysteries are meant to linger, like the faint echo of a song lost to time. You know, sometimes the most haunting stories are the ones that never quite end, like the Blitberg choir still whispering in the stones, still waiting for someone to listen. And you wonder, what if the choir never left? What if they're still here, singing just for us, just for the ones who dare to listen? Maybe they're not ghosts at all. Maybe they're just waiting for the next story, the next listener, to come and find them. So, as you turn off this tale, remember sometimes the silence is louder than the song. And if you ever find yourself near Blithburg, you might just hear them singing, waiting for you. You ever wondered what it feels like to walk into a place that remembers your name? Bideford, England, whispers secrets like a ghost in the dark, and the air here hums with the way of old sins. This is where the Bideford witch trials began, where fear and faith twisted into something darker. The sea roars, but it's the silence between the waves that feels like a warning. They say the air here smells of salt and something older, like the weight of 1,000 unspoken prayers. You can almost hear the voices of the accused, echoing through the centuries. This place doesn't just haunt the living, it remembers, and it's waiting for you to listen. You know, the Bideford witch trials didn't start with a scream or a shadow. They began with a girl, a mother, and a town that turned its back on them both. The girl claimed to see visions, angels, spirits, and a witch who had cursed their family. The townsfolk listened, but they didn't believe. They believed in punishment, not protection. The trial was swift. The mother was burned at the stake, and the girl, now branded a witch, was sent to the dungeon. The town had its justice, but the truth, it was buried with her ashes. For years, the town tried to forget, but the girl's spirit lingered, whispering through the wind, through the creak of old beams, through the silence that followed the fire. And so, Bideford's history was written in ash and fear, a tale of a mother's love, a daughter's innocence, and a town that chose to burn rather than believe. You ever notice how the first whispers of something wrong often start with a faint, familiar scent? Like the old house in Bideford had this peculiar, almost sweet smell, like burnt sugar and something just slightly off. It was the kind of smell that clings to your clothes and lingers in your thoughts. Then there were the sounds, like a child's laughter echoing through the empty halls, or the creak of a floorboard in a room you knew was empty. It wasn't loud, just enough to make your skin prickle and your heart race, like something was watching. One morning, a neighbor found the garden gate open, and the roses were in full bloom except for one. The one near the old well had been stripped of its petals, as if something had taken them one by one, in silence. And then, of course, the voices, not loud, not screaming but low, whispering in the dark, like the old women of Bideford had never really left the town, just waiting, in the silence, for someone to listen. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Before you go, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments what you'd like us to make next. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end.